well, I'm delighted that all of us are here this and Sister V. And so we're gonna start tonight with our book study here. We're gonna go from pages 48-ish to 82-ish. At Baldwin's encounter with the Nation of Islam. And how about Sister V? Why don't you start us off with prayer, and then we'll plunge right in.
Okay, I'm borrowing a prayer from Hear My Voice, a prayer book which our own Beth Bingham contributed to.
Oh, yeah, I have that.
So let us pray. Just and compassionate God, you provide strength through goodness and show the power of compassion. You lift up those who are down low and promise relief to the poor. Defend us from all violence. Provide the courage we need to be kind. Assist us in being forgiving and fill us with a spirit of generosity. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
What Sister and I our pre-conversation, one of the things we started going over, it's always kind of a great moment where I'm like, what year did that happen? When did that happen? And so what we thought is that that it might be helpful to do a little primer on the Nation of Islam, just to sort of get us up to speed. Perhaps some of you have read a lot in this area, or middling about in this area, or perhaps you're like, now who are they? So anyway, Sister V, give us a little history here, if you would, my friend.
Yeah, so the Nation of Islam was, it started around 1930, but it's not the first sort of Black separatist movement that happened in the United States, particularly after World War I. So it's the idea that Black people will form their own separate nation. They'll have a separate economy. They'll have a separate place to live. They will completely separate themselves from white society, which has, caused so much harm. And the Nation of Islam, they adopted Islam rather than Christianity because, like we were talking about last week, Christianity for them was associated with slave owners and colonialism. And so they looked to another religion that they could say was not part of slavery and colonialism, and that was Islam. So they kind of formed this both Black identity and religious movement that's separatist. And yeah, from there, because they really, really wanted to believe deeply in this sense of segregation, they started looking at ways that they could improve themselves and be completely self-reliant.
And this starts with Elijah Muhammad?
It starts actually before him. Elijah Muhammad was really kind of the second person to come along in the Nation of Islam as leader. The first leader is kind of this murky figure that I haven't been able to find a lot of information about. Okay. But yeah, and that was about 1930, and Elijah Muhammad came along a few years after that, yes.
His name was Bard, and he disappeared like in 1934. He just disappeared.
Yeah, it's a really strange story. There's not a whole lot of information about him. But yeah, that's kind of where it started.
Okay, and then when does Malcolm X come into the picture?
So Malcolm X comes into the picture after he encounters Nation of Islam in prison.
That's right.
And he sees how this is, like you like to say, transformative in people's lives. And so when he comes out of prison, he sees how this can really change and transform his life. So this is probably, he was born in 1924, 25. Somewhere thereabouts.
Okay.
Yeah, and so he sees this movement that's really, and Baldwin says, it's getting people out of prison and keeping them out of prison. It's getting them off of drugs. It's this transformative movement, and coming from prison and seeing this as something that can really change his life, that's how he gets involved in the Nation of Islam.
And so, go ahead.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, so he's in this movement, and he's pretty zealous for it, but there comes a rift between himself and Elijah Muhammad, and part of it is he makes the Hajj, and he sees.
And tell us what the Hajj is, because not everybody.
Oh, sorry. One of the pillars of Islam is you make the pilgrimage to Mecca, and he goes there, and all of a sudden he sees multicultural Islam. And he sees all of these different cultures and nations coming together under something that can be unifying and peaceful. And it makes him question the Nation of Islam's version of this religion. And at some point, Elijah Muhammad is said to have met with the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan, because they both have the same goal, which is complete segregation of Blacks and whites. And I think we were talking earlier, Bonnie, you remembered a comment from the head of the American Nazi Party,
right,
who praised Elijah Muhammad.
Right.
I don't think they ever met, but he praised him. He's like, yes, he's got the right idea. And that was kind of the final straw for Malcolm X. And that's when he really split. The rift became wider and wider. So that was about 1964. And then in February of 1965, he was assassinated by members of the Nation of Islam. So yeah, it was.
That was when I jumped in and I said, do you think the CIA did it?
Which, I mean, it's an interesting thought. It is. There's all those conspiracy theories because of the way the FBI really, really had files and files and files on Martin Luther King. How could they be involved? But yeah, I really don't know.
But I mean, I think that's kind of a very interesting piece. And this is a part we didn't talk to. So after Elijah Muhammad, is that where Louis Farrakhan comes in?
Yes. Okay. Yep. He is his successor. Yeah. So, yeah.
And it's if you drive into Chicago, and if you come in over the tollway, right, the quicker way, if you go in on 90 and not 94, and then get off at Stony Island, and wind down around through the University of Chicago to get to Lakeshore Drive, which was always my goal. Like, I always went to Lakeshore Drive, no matter where I was going, so I could drive along the lake. Even if everywhere else would have been a better, more efficient way to do it, I'm like, no, I'm going to the lake. But in doing that, then you go past Louis Farrakhan's temple, and it's quite the setup. So, and you'll be interested to know the last time I drove through, they're all online. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting because while this is going on, and the reason I put in the timeline that we did, you have nations in Africa throwing off colonial rule. So Tunisia, Algeria, Kenya, Uganda, you have all these nations deciding that we don't have to be under colonial rule anymore. And so there is, this kind of vision of the Nation of Islam saying we can be part of this movement where Black people throw off any vestiges of white rule. Yeah.
Anyway, I thought it would be fun and helpful to just get a little bit of that backdrop. And then let's go back to where we started, where we stopped last week, which was that incredibly powerful quote. And I think it's somewhere around 47.
Yeah.
Go for it, Sister V.
If the concept of God has any validity or any use, it can only be to make us larger, freer, and more loving. If God cannot do this, then it is time we got rid of him. And Yeah. And this whole encounter is kind of Baldwin's way of saying, well, if we get rid of that God, what do we put in its place? And this is one of the options that he sees going on around him.
And please throw in the chat, but this, I was so struck then by Baldwin's description of watching the Nation of Islam preachers in Harlem, and with the people just standing and just feel it, just seeing in their eyes the delight and that sense of being empowered and known and understood. And then do you remember how he described the look on the police as they were standing around, right?
Yeah, just baffled, like, okay, whoa, wait, what?
And he says they're almost hapless looking. And he would feel sorry for them if he didn't know otherwise. But friends, do you remember why, and sort of chime in here, do you remember why he said he believed that the police were looking so hapless? He suddenly realized that they were
afraid.
They were afraid.
They felt some power or some sense there that, as he says, it's beyond, it's not a problem you solve with a gun or a club, but they sense something there.
Yeah, and that I think in many ways they were back on their heels because they're like, we're not calling the shots here with this. This is something. Just seeing the transformation in the eyes of the people who are listening. And then, do you remember, other folks? Do you remember how Baldwin describes how that word gets taken back to everyone who hadn't heard it? Do you remember? They were saying that the crowd, he talked about that the crowd sort of swallowing the theology as everybody seems to swallow theology, which I'm not quite sure about that, but that they had this, the speakers had this such sense of intelligence and hope on their faces, and that the people who were listening were not being drugged, but rather they were being jolted. And that he felt like they would go back to all the areas and offer, like, to the places where the people in the alleys with the needles and with the alcohol, that they would, all of them would go back and be able to say, there's something else, something different. We don't need this. And then there was this point where he said, if, and again, he kind of raised the thing that he had talked about last week, at least this is what I heard it, is that that the church, that there wouldn't be so much need for the church or narcotics, right? And if it wasn't for the church, the Black church and narcotics, then he said a lot more blood would flow in the streets of Harlem. Do you remember that line and what he was trying to get at there?
And he's saying that there would be a lot more violence than there was.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it wasn't, people weren't going to be stilted or appeased or told to wait or be anesthetized.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of where he takes up, the Christian church. For him, it failed because it didn't give people any real hope of transformation. It did say, wait. It did say, well, just try to live a pious life. Come to church, be a good person. He didn't see in it that power to transform that he saw happening with the Nation of Islam.
And Islam, the Nation of Islam, it seems essentially says, you have value because you are a Black person, you are good, and the white folks are bad.
Yeah.
Which is totally different from, you need to just sit and take it.
Yeah, it's, you know, Bishop Bonnie and I were talking about before the class, we were talking about the nature of power and what life-giving power is and what destructive power is. And so he sees next to each other, and Baldwin says, you know, this idea that the Nation of Islam was giving out that, you know, white people were created by the devil and they're doomed to fail. He said that really was just the flip side of the theology of slavery that said, Black people are the sons of Ham. They're cursed from the book of Genesis to be slaves. And so you had both of this kind of myth-making, theological myth-making, to try to justify the cruel use of power. So,
and he juxtaposes, he kind of slams up against each other, love versus power, and rage versus pain, and trying to decide which one to choose. And that was the part for me where I was like, wait a second, I think power, like money, I think it's morally neutral. I don't think power is necessarily bad. I don't think money is necessarily bad. I think it depends on what you do with them. And I think he's, and there's a community organizer who I've heard say, and I think it's a really interesting piece, that you can only get as much justice as you have power to create. And so I'm like, well, this is a different type of power.
Yeah, and I was telling Bishop Bonnie, one of my favorite sayings, actually from Sufi Islam, is that when the power of love overcomes the love of power, there will be peace. And so there's idea, I think, of productive life-giving power, which I think James Baldwin would root within love. And certainly as Christians, we root in love. And then there's this desire for domination, that kind of power. The power that exists by taking something from someone else rather than building yourself up, I guess. But a power that's built on subjugation and oppression of someone else, rather than the power that comes from the strength of really fully realizing your own humanity and learning to love other people.
So I mean, that's a piece that I'm always going to kind of continually go back to think about how we make use of or are used by power. How did it strike you when he starts talking about he's talking about Tanzania and Tanzania asking the French, hey,
oh, Tunisia, yeah, yes.
Yeah, sorry, right, Tanzania. Don't mind me, I'm making up names. But that notion of so I'm sorry, are you civilized? I'm sorry, are you ready for self-rule? Are you a Christian country?
Yeah, he starts looking at all of the cruelties perpetrated by white people who are saying that we're Christian, and we're actually here to Christianize the Africans. I mean, that was part of slavery. Well, but that's okay. We're Christianizing them, so there's a good side to this. That idea that white people had held on to what he called, we talked about last time, that sense of innocence. Like we're here for the good, so we're a Christian people, and
and you'll be better because of it. Trust me.
Exactly. And yet here are these colonized African countries who experienced, a lot of violence. We talked last time about, the first concentration camp being in Namibia, and they're saying, wait a minute, you're trying to tell us that we need to be Christianized and made civilized by you? Look at your uncivil, unchristian behavior toward us. It's a worthy challenge, I think, on the part of Tunisians to ask the French that.
Well, and I think for us, for me as a white person, to continually be thinking about what I think Christianity can do, has done, and so like, well, we're Christian, and then he makes this amazing, and I never thought of the German Holocaust in this manner. Oh wait, oh, you're Christians? Oh, and oh my goodness, look at the Holocaust, and that's a Christian nation. Now, I would make the case that Bonhoeffer made the case that they were not Christian.
Right, with the Barman Declaration, saying, no, wait a minute, this is not what Christians do.
But to kind of to look at that, and then he takes it so far as to say, you know what? I'm not surprised about the Holocaust. I'm not surprised that this could happen. Because I've seen what white people have done to blacks in this country for 400 years. White Christians.
Yeah. Yeah, just because it wasn't systematic and, as he put it, carefully counted and planned out, it still happened. And I was telling Bishop Bonnie beforehand, I said, I've heard, from many African Americans, just that nagging little thought in the back of your head, could it actually happen to us here? At some point, would white society get to the point that they would systematically try to control Black people through that kind of really structured violence? I mean, to a certain extent, we're living under structured violence. But yeah, something as systematic as the Holocaust. And yeah, there's that thought in the back of the head, boy, could it happen here? And Baldwin has that same thought.
There is that continual chiseling away at innocence.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be like, no, oh,
right.
I wonder.
Yeah.
And then the fabulous quote that he talks about, that the evil, let's see, where is it? It's his quote that he does. Remember, friends, when they were in the bar at O'Hare? And to be fair, I spent a fair amount of time at O'Hare, and people always get cranky at O'Hare. I mean, I don't know, man. It's just a cranky making place. That's sad. He's talking about how it's evil people. The world, civilization isn't killed by evil people.
Yeah, civilization is not destroyed by wicked people,
but by spineless ones.
It is not necessarily that people be wicked, only that they be spineless.
And my wondering how I may have just sat quietly, not said anything, or just denied that it was possible. And I wonder, I mean, I wonder if much of what the pulling of the veil after Mr. Floyd's murder, how much of our world has changed because we have cell phones with cameras now.
Yeah, and that's something that you heard from a lot of longtime civil rights campaigners. They're saying this has been going on forever. It's just that now we can post the video of it on YouTube or on Facebook. It's not that it's new. It's just always been here. And now you can see it. And you can't deny that it's going on anymore.
Yeah. I'm looking at some of the quotes in the chat. These are great. Yeah, the awareness of being a child of God tends to stabilize the ego and result in a new courage, fearlessness, and power. Howard Thurman. Baldwin recognized that the lack of our ability to accept and reconcile with our past fuels, and I would say I think that our part of this is perhaps the white people, our collective guilt and inability to grow out of the lie. So that loss of our continued claim on innocence prevents us from becoming the children of God, all that God is longing for us to be and to do.
Yeah, because I think it's in the letter to his nephew where he said, you know, it's so necessary for white people to see reality for what it is, because that's the only time that we'll be able to change, is if you recognize, you know, the reality of who we are and how we got here. Until that happens, we're not going to be able to change. Yeah.
So let's shift a little bit. Let's go to one of the most interesting dinner parties I've ever read about. Tell me, throw it in the chat for a minute now, friends. What struck you about this dinner party? I mean, it's wonderfully described. He's clearly, I mean, we've got a writer really reflecting. So take a minute, put some things into the chat that struck you about this dinner party. And wouldn't you have loved to have been a fly on the wall?
Yes.
What stands out to you? Yep. Really structured.
Yeah, almost ritualistic.
Yeah. Particularly when he's speaking, everyone's like, yes.
Yes. Which, for those of us who grew up in a Black church, we're really used to hearing all those responses during a sermon. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Right. There you go. Baldwin's, you know, sort of soul searching.
Yeah.
The submission of the young men sitting at the table.
Well, I believe that the author is really satirizing it.
There's a lot of really, he's using a lot of irony and satire in here. Yeah.
I was really struck by the role of women.
Yeah, when he walks into that room and the women are on one side, they're playing with the baby, and the men are all on the other side. Yeah.
and they sit at different tables. I was struck by everybody kind of going off. Well, and how about that? And if you go to what Debbie's talking about here, holding his own, but then also the soul searching part. Judith, I think, was talking about that, but the soul searching, because he's walking in, and what's he aware of that's in his pocket as he's walking in?
Yeah, that pack of cigarettes. He's like, oh boy, I got a pack of cigarettes in my pocket. I'm not going to be able to have a drink. It's like, you know.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Any fundamentalist, I mean, there's a real similarity in fundamentalism across, I think, religions. You know, Hindu, Islam, Judaism, Christianity. He was respectful, but didn't want to give in, but wouldn't give in. But did he kind of want to a little bit? That's the part that I couldn't quite get. I'm like, oh, I think he does. Because it could be an answer. It could be an easier answer.
Yeah, I mean, he's looking at this as the failure of white Christianity in the neighborhood he grew up in Harlem. And then he's saying, well, what if we get rid of that, what fills the void? And he's looking at the Nation of Islam. He's saying, well, how would this fill the void? What if we did try to claim that same kind of power that what white people held over us? What would that mean for us? What are the possibilities of that? And but at the same time, I mean, we have that last statement from the essay from last week, which is, if it doesn't make us larger and freer and more loving, is it worth taking up?
Yeah.
And what he sees at this table is not making people larger, freer, and more loving.
Yeah.
And he's remembering his own white friends whom he loves and cherishes and have supported him. And so he's looking at his individual relationships and thinking that he would have to abandon all of those and be disloyal to all of those if he bought into their philosophy.
Yeah.
Yep. But and then there's this wonderful sort of Elijah Muhammad, as he said, kind of ricocheting the questions to him. Kind of like, I wonder what our young man thinks of these things. Boom.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine that was the most comfortable dinner that James Baldwin ever had. But you told me something that I didn't know, which is when he makes the mention of where he's going after this.
Oh, right. So here's the little Chicago thing, friends, right? He says, and then he gives them a completely white address, right? Because he's on the south side of the city, a completely white address. And I'm like, I said to Sister V, I said, he didn't give them just a completely white address. I am sure that he gave them a Boys Town address. I am sure that he was going up to Halstead, right, which is where Boys Town, it's literally called Boys Town. It's the gay, the one of, like the gay area of Chicago. It's been that way for decades and decades and decades, right? And that I am sure that Baldwin is going up to Boys Town, and he's gonna go out at the manhole for drinks with his gay friends, his gay white friends. And so it's this completely, and then I'm really struck by this man, by Baldwin, who, he's gonna go be, he's not going to be able to be out. And it's not like you could at that time, like, it's not like white people were all excited about gay people at that point either, but he's not able to show a true self in the midst of his Black brothers and sisters. And then he can get to be gay with the white guys, but then how are they dealing with him being Black? And I'm just kind of struck by this continual, and then that's when I finally said to Sister V, oh my God, no wonder he moved to Paris.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been just a complete sense of displacement. Wherever he was, he could never be completely whole. We talk about places and spaces where you can bring your whole self and not just the parts that are acceptable to that crowd. I don't know where he found places, well, outside of Paris, where he could bring his whole self. And so there he is sitting at this table with Elijah Muhammad. And not only is it's not a place where he can be free. It's not a place where he can be his authentic self. And if that's the case, then it's not really the answer to that failure of white Christianity that he's seen in Harlem, because he can't be a whole person there. And I think there's some point where he talks about his liberal white friends never quite understanding him as a human being. They could see him as a victim and as an object.
Right, like a symbol of victim.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here, let me help you up, right? but not
as a whole.
as a
Yeah, not a whole human being.
whole.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, what a sense of just being displaced. And maybe that's why he was such a good observer. You know, when we're reading about this dinner party, I was saying, this is a really good observational writer. He is just taking in all these details. And maybe that sense of being displaced also allowed him to be such a good observer. Yeah.
Mhm. What if you're looking at this, Sister V, what are we hoping? What are you hoping that 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 I as a white woman, what are you hoping I get out of some of these descriptions?
I think, you know, all of the possible reactions that Black people can have to our 400 years of history, and understanding that there is a place in that for Black anger. And, you know, historically, any show of Black anger has been seen as a threat to be, yes, immediately suppressed. But it's a righteous anger. It should be honored. And what Baldwin is talking about is, well, what do we do with this anger that is positive, that builds something rather than destroys ourselves? And I was telling Bishop Bonnie, I had a priest colleague ask me one time, and I've never seen the Key and Peele show, but apparently during the Obama administration, they had this skit where they had this alter ego for Obama who got to be his anger translator and got to say what Obama was actually thinking. And I got asked by a priest colleague, she said, you know, you don't get angry. Is that socialized or is that your personality? And I don't have an answer for that, because we are heavily socialized, because you don't want to be the angry Black woman, especially if your hair is short as mine. You really don't want to be the angry Black woman. So, you know, is that my nature, or has that been socialized? And so I think for white people to understand that Black anger is legitimate and that it actually should be honored and said, yeah, you have a right to this anger. And to understand why a movement like the Nation of Islam would look to be separate from white people. To understand why some Black people look at Christianity and see this vestige of slavery and colonialism and not be comfortable with it. Yeah.
And I think that's, I wonder sometimes if, again, it's like, I think that white people can be socialized. I can be socialized to how things are supposed to be, what the hierarchy is supposed to look like. And then when the hierarchy gets upset, it's like, oh. And I mean, it can play out with women who, you know, if you're a man, you're seen as assertive. You know, a woman, you're seen as
bossy.
Yeah, or rhymes with witchy. And then double that, tenfold it if you happen to be a woman of color, you know, a woman with Black or brown skin. But then the piece in this also, because he's writing to a white audience, but he's also writing to a Black audience. And that notion of what is he longing for there? And friends, before Sister V chimes in, what do you think he's longing for? In addition, so what do you think for the white folks? Right, we got Sister V's opinion. But what do you think? What do you think he's longing for the white folks and for the black folks who are reading this? What's Baldwin want? When we write, we always write for something. Okay, and so Robert's talking about white people will not understand black anger unless they have a clear awareness of our history and the year that is systemic, of the years of systemic injustice. No, we don't do a good job of teaching our history. Not at all. He wants awareness. What else?
I was struck, and this is kind of towards the end of this section, where he's just kind of wrestling himself with, as you said earlier, do we feel rage? Do we feel pain? Is there, maybe there isn't a clear answer of how we ought to feel, how we ought to act, how we ought to treat each other. He's just being very honest about his own, I think down deep, he wants love to somehow be the answer, but understanding that may be difficult to get to.
Yeah.
And he's just very honest about how he's feeling and saying, I think, I want you to help me think this through.
Yeah. Yeah, and Brenda's, yeah, thank you. And Brenda's talking about in the chat about for Blacks, he's justifying our feelings and to say it's okay to feel the way we do, right? And Mary, I think that's part of what you're getting at. It's like, and feelings are, friends, they just are. And delegitimizing feelings only makes them come sideways, and it's never, I don't know about you, but that never goes well for me. Yeah, and yeah, Barbara's talking about that we're not innocent to see the truth.
Yeah, I think part of, what he's longing for white people is, when he's talking about his liberal friends, to see Black people as whole human beings, with this legitimate anger, with this really just kind of working through, wow, how do we come together? How do we live together? What is the answer to this, this conundrum of this segregated American society? Where do we go from here?
Well, that's, I'm guided more by my reading of Ellison's Invisible Man.
Uh-huh.
And it's not the invisible man, recall, it's invisible man. Mankind individually are invisible. And I think what Baldwin would want, as Ellison, is for what you've just said, Sister V, to be seen as a whole human being, but to be seen, to be noticed, not to be ignored. And it's not just the Black man, it's all human beings are looked past by others.
Yeah, it's and I think about what he wants for Black people, in addition to what Brenda said about saying, yeah, you have a right to feel this way. But at the same time, he's looking at the Nation of Islam's idea of wielding the same kind of destructive power that white people did. And he's realizing that if Black people try to do this, it's also going to be destructive to ourselves. I think this is how sometimes I read Jesus saying, turn the other cheek, not as this act of passivity, but saying, when you respond to injustice, don't try to take on the tools and the actions of that injustice, because that'll destroy you. You need to find another way to respond that is just as powerful. It does have power, but it's not going to be self-destructive. And he looks at this separatism of the Nation of Islam and their hatred of white people and, casting white people as the devil. And he realizes that is the same poison, if you will, of white supremacy. It's just in a different version. And it's going to be just as corrosive and destructive if Black people do that.
Am I remembering, didn't Audre Lorde say something along those lines? The tools of the master cannot be used.
Oh, you can't dismantle the house of the master with the master's tools. Yeah.
You guys, this is why it's so darn much fun to have conversations with Sister V. I say vague things, and to have her just go, oh yeah, that was boom, 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 boom. And oh my God, this is so much fun to watch your mind work.
Yeah. You can't see my bookshelf, but Audre Lorde's like right over here.
Okay, now I've really gone down a bunny trail. And Audre Lorde, guys, died in 1987 or so. She was a poet, African-American, lesbian poet, author, amazing. Her funeral was at the Cathedral of Saint John the Divine.
Wow.
And it happened right when I was in seminary at Union, just across the way. But yeah. The notion is, Brenda's saying he wondered how anyone could live totally separate.
Yeah, we were talking about earlier the practicalities. He's like, you won't have a currency, you won't have land. It's like just the practicality. You're not going to have a separate nation here on the continent of North America. So what are you really looking for?
Yeah, and then to just for the hay of it, friends, I'm going to go theological for a minute because it's Advent, and talk about a God who comes into the world, I think not to dictate creedal statements, but to be in relationship with every human being. And I think that we as Christians through the ages have screwed that up mightily. But every once in a while, friends, we get it. And I just, part of what I've been thinking about in this time in our world, in our country, how wildly, massively important it is to remember a God who comes into the world to not dictate, but to be in relationship. And what that might look like if we're able to pull a hint, a whiff of that off in our own lives. Okay, maybe that's a Christmas sermon, I'm not sure.
Well, it's interesting that, thinking about that it is through loving our neighbor that we stay in relationship with God. They're connected, And so here's another quote for you, Bishop Bonnie, from Toni Morrison. Love is divine only and difficult always. Love is divine only and difficult always. And when you look at Baldwin's conclusion at the end of this letter, that separatism and adopting these destructive relationships with power and adopting the same kind of hatred that was shown to us, that's not the answer. So white Christianity has failed to give us a transformative hope. Nation of Islam, okay, I see it transforming lives, but there's going to be this inner corrosion because it's based on contempt for humanity, just because it's white. It's based on hatred and separatism. So it's going to have this corrosive effect eventually. And so, okay, that doesn't work. What next? And I think for Baldwin, that idea is completely honoring and loving, each of us as whole human beings. So for him, as a gay Black man, and learning to live together in love and not separately, we're going to have to learn how to live together.
There's something that has been gnawing at me through all of this conversation, and that is, I watch the news hour pretty faithfully, PBS, etc. And there was a story on the news hour tonight that kind of throws a wrench into some of what's being said.
Oh, no.
France is dealing with their Charlie Hebdo problem. The people that went into this newspaper and shot all the editors, and they were Muslims. So France is trying to figure out, what are we going to do? One of the things that they announced today, the president of France said, we're going to not accept anyone moving into the country that is a mom. And that really, I look at France as the father of America. That's not American.
Well, it wasn't for a while.
Well, it's really interesting, and I don't want to get too off track here, but racism in France, and particularly racism and where it intersects with religion, particularly Islam.
Yeah.
France, they have this doctrine of laïcité, which means you don't have any public display of your religion in public spaces.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so, but they also have never, well, they don't actually, in their version of census, they don't acknowledge race. Because they say, no, this is the land of liberté, fraternité, égalité.
Yes.
France is holding on to its own sense of innocence, that we can't be racist, because this is our motto, and we have laïcité, which means that we don't see religion. And so for people who are activists within French communities against racism, one of their biggest problems is they can't even say how many people of color live there, because France will not keep track of it, because they say we don't have a race problem. And so you get this intersection of people who are made to feel as if they don't belong in that country because they are not seen. They are officially not seen. And it's a really unique, manifestation of racism in France. And yeah, that sense of, well, we can just keep them out, that you're talking about. That's actually something that's happened here in America. We did kind of, have a president who wanted a Muslim ban.
Yeah, and
but yeah.
It's also, I wonder about the fear as well. There've been a number, it's a much smaller country than ours. And there've been a number of, in the last 5 years, just horrific things.
Yeah.
Extremists. And it's just, and how people kind of tried to hold the line on that. It's super, I don't know, it's super interesting. And wow, this is where I say something that's not that insightful, but I'm going to say it because I just am. It's wow, extremism never gets us terribly far.
Yeah. And I think that's what Baldwin felt with Nation of Islam. That's not going to get us very far.
Sister Veronica.
Yes, ma'am.
My first trip to Paris, to France, was January 1973. And I went there with the dumb impression that race was not seen. I absolutely did. Now, I flew in a plane from London to Paris, so I was not flying from the United States of America. When I got off the plane, no one would touch my luggage. I had to go and ask. The police turned their back on me. I had never, ever witnessed racism as tough as Paris, France. They wouldn't touch my hair. They said, no, kinky, no, no, no. They followed me in the Champs-Elysees like I was going to steal something. The taxi cabs would not stop for me. I had never faced racism, and I was born and raised in the South. Paris was horrible for Black folks.
It's a very different experience there. My first trip was a little after yours. I first went there in 2003, but yeah, I had to deal with a very different form of racism.
Yeah, and my friend whom I was visiting was Black. And she said to me, as long as she was on the left bank, it was okay. But the Parisians only dealt with Black folk who had artistic talents.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we've looked at, the global, in a sense, particularly for the African countries, the global experience of both racism and trying to get out from under that. And yeah, so Baldwin is looking at all these circumstances and saying, okay, so what do we do next? And that is actually the last part of the book we're going to read for next week. Is his thoughts on, wow, okay, I've looked at these aspects, and what do we do next? Yeah.
So friends, till the end of the book, and I realize is it the eve of Christmas Eve?
Yep, it's the 23rd.
Okay, well, I know most of you are going to be rushing around at the mall. Oh, wait, no, we won't be doing that, will we? So I'm very much looking forward to seeing you all then. I do want to just offer you again reminders of 3 events. Friday night, and it's on our website, and it was in the news blast. Trinity in the Woods is going to host a diocesan-wide carol sing. So Rachel Rose, Julia Hutter Bailey, and Eric Travis are going to put that on for us. So, get your hot chocolate, get your Christmas tree, get your stockings hung by the fire, and we can do that this Friday at 7. And then moving on, Christmas Day. Thank you, Anna, for throwing that in the chat. She just put the link. Christmas Day, 10 a.m. I'll be doing a bishop's message from our cathedral. Short sermon, Christmas story, a little bit of music. So I'd invite you to join me for that on Christmas Day at 10 a.m. There you go. That's the real link. Apparently we sometimes give the fake link. No, go. Thank you, Anna. That's much more detailed. And then on the 27th, friends, at 11 o'clock on that Sunday after Christmas, again, there'll be a Zoom call. I'll be preaching, officiating, and Governor Gretchen Whitmer will be with us to offer us greetings. So that's on the 27th. If you can join in for that, that would be great. I would love for our governor to see that we are many, so that when we start talking about issues of justice, she remembers that we are many. And then with that, let's. I'm going to do my favorite collect out of Compline. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Thank you. Let us pray. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night. Give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, Lord Christ. Give rest to the weary. Bless the dying, soothe the suffering. Pity the afflicted, and shield the joyous. And all for your love's sake. Amen.
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 Blessing, Sister V, thank you so very much. All of you, thank you so much. Blessed Advent.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing
you
you
very
next
much.
week if it works for you.
Yes.
Good to see everybody.
You want to know how the book ends.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Bishop Bunny,
Yes,
this
ma'am.
is Brenda again.
Brenda,
The president of the last president of the United States mentioned last night on the Trevor Noah show that he had reread The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin yesterday, and he speaks about it.
There
So
we
if you can go on YouTube and look at the Daily Show for last night,
Right.
you'll hear our president, Barack Obama, discuss
Trevor
his
Noah.
reading The
Oh.
Fire Next Time.
See, perhaps he'll want to. Anna, why don't you just send him the link, okay? I'm sure he'll want to.
Yeah, send
Oh,
him the
yeah.
link. He can join us next week. He just finished reading and he spoke about some of the things James Baldwin was saying in the book.
Okay.
Thank you. All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you next week. Everybody stay safe.
You. That was a Trevor Noah show?
Yeah, last night.
Okay, I'll look for it on YouTube.
Whatever last night was. Go on YouTube and see him. He
Okay.
speaks about 5 minutes about, The Fire Next Time and James.
Wonderful. Okay, all right. Have a good weekend. Well, I'll see some of you
Good
on
one.
Sunday in
Talk to you.
church.
Yep.
Yeah.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Mhm.